It's not a card. A lot of people think it's the card. It is a system. It's an entire system. And so this is a national ID. The federal government controlling driving privileges and controlling identification across the entire country, building a command and control system through which every person can be tracked. The whole plan here, they said what we want to do is put this onto your phones in a mobile driver's license and have real-time access to it. So really what we're talking about here is the movement of America through the Real ID legislation in 2005 toward a social credit system.
The first step to a complete financial control grid is a Real ID, is a digital ID. They tried to do it with the vaccine passports. Now they're coming back around with, driver's licenses and Real ID. But the key to a successful financial control grid is a very high quality ID system, so that I can make sure you're Carolyn, I can make sure you're Polly, I can make sure Catherine is Catherine. And so first step to a complete digital concentration camp is this very high quality national ID system that can be aggregated globally.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca from Mexico City with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson from Oakland, California. We're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, contact Andy through our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. All right. Today we're joined by
I feel like official because previous times I've been on What's Left, it was just me and Andy, so it was kind of like not really What's Left. But now I'm here with
stand-in for missing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now I'm like a real guest on your show.
Because Eduardo's here.
Well, Brandee, we're very honored and content to have you here. I'm very excited to have an episode with you finally. I know you did one with Andy before. It's always confusing with me when I say Andy Brandee because they have that pronunciation, that E at the end. But anyhow, I would love for you to share with us what we're going to be discussing, or Andy, if you would like to introduce the topic of today, because I think it's an important topic, and I got your email on what we're going to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start, or do you want to?
I'll introduce it.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're going to be talking about Real ID, which is in the U.S., the push for driver's licenses to be federally compliant with Real ID. And when I became aware of this, I got rid of my Real ID that I had gotten before I realized it was an issue. And as I've learned more about it and how dangerous it is, and with the upcoming, we'll talk about it, but upcoming kind of deadline and push for people to get it, I figured now is the time to not only talk about it so people know what it is and why it's a problem, but also share just, it took me some learning to figure out how to go from having a Real ID to not having one. And it's not information you can find readily. So to share that with people.
And this episode fits in with a whole series of episodes we've been doing since COVID started, where we've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution, the technocratic apparatus that is rising up around us, the prison that's sort of being built. When we talk about Doge and AI, so this is just another aspect of that. And I'm going to say it's also going to be related to immigration and open borders. And why me and Eduardo and Eduardo would say everyone should be undocumented, and I agree with him.
I do like that. I appreciate that sentiment.
But this is going to find a connection here as well. So this isn't just a Brandee episode. Oh, she's invited because she is becoming a real expert, I think, on Real ID, and has helped give me resources to become more educated about it. But it's very much a part of how right in front of us we're seeing the prison being constructed. The digital and technocratic prison. And so you might want to do something about it. And there are some things you can do to push back.
Yes. So I guess let's get right into it then.
So the Real ID Act was something passed in 2005 by Congress, and the pretext was, hey, after 9/11 and those terrorists got, fake IDs and whatever, that we, need to up our security and create this, federal, normally, driver's licenses are under the jurisdiction of each individual state. So the things that the 2005 Real ID Act mandated was that everyone needed to prove their identification to be compliant for a Real ID, with a birth certificate, your social security card, if you've changed your name, your marriage certificate, proof of where you live, a lot of documentation that then is digitally scanned and cross-referenced to maintain accuracy. It also requires that you are in evidence of being in the country legally. And now currently, Real ID has not yet been enforced, and California also has AB 60, which is a legislation that says that undocumented immigrants can get IDs and driver's licenses. So, but that could change if once Real ID actually goes into effect. So, anyways, it also requires the states to upgrade their technology to capture digital images of all your source documents, as well as a mandatory facial image that then is stored, and that then this technology has to be able to be shared with all the other states and the federal government through integrated database so that they can cross-reference things. And, basically it amounts to a national ID system, whereas before we just had individual states. And once in effect, a Real ID will be required to be shown for 3 official purposes, 2 of which most people don't encounter. One is going into a nuclear facility, the other is going into certain federal facilities, and the third one, which everyone cares about, is being able to get on an airplane. So that's what they're using as leverage. But continuing with the history, I'll just say the claim benefits are to stop, terrorists and, fraud, and good for verifying identity. And, it's just all safe and verification. You are who you say you are. That's the pretext. So that's what the act says and does, which I read it. It's like 3 pages.
So the Real ID thing, Brandee mentioned this. It really is a response to the September 11th attack. It is the Real ID is an extension of the Patriot Act, and comes out of that. And one of the things, because it really wasn't an issue about people having fake IDs or anything like that. Those people who were accused of doing that were here illegally.
Passports
Yes, they were here illegally.
But the 9/11 commission recommended we enhance security, right?
Well, but because the thing that they want to do, and the reason that and if you look if you go to their own website, the let's see, TSA website right here, they will say, hey, it's in a FAQ about the Real ID. We're not looking to build a national ID system, okay? But we're just trying to standardize the ID system across the country. And the problem is that you cannot build a national system unless all the states are standardized. So that's what they're attempting to do, is to make sure that all the states collect the same information, collect digital facial stuff as opposed to taking pictures. That's important because one of the companies that the federal government is working with, which is IDEMIA, is a company which is basically saying we use face recognition and fingerprints to can help you build a national ID system. That's what this company is. Its raison d'etre, which is how do we help countries build national biometric control systems or identification systems. And so that came out of the 2005, that all this push that we're seeing out of Real ID that seems so far away from, oh, it's just Real ID, it's just a new system. And one other thing that's important is it used to be you could go from state to state to state and get different IDs.
Yes.
I can drive in Missouri, I can drive in California, and I get a different ID, and that each one, I can drive legally in Missouri. Now, before,
Yeah, that is the I forgot about
Yeah.
that. The other thing included in the act is you can only have a license in one state. Now, there must be an exception if people live in two states, but I didn't research that.
Oh.
But basically, they will not issue because now there is a federal database and they
Right.
can check. Oh, you have a Florida's driver's license. I'm sorry,
Right.
we can't issue one here in
you don't,
California.
because I don't need a Missouri ID to drive in Missouri. So if I have a California ID, to drive legally, the cop pulls me over. They just check the ID and they say, okay, you're in Missouri, but you have a California ID. You're good. But what it's showing is they are getting a system which communicates with itself, which across the board nationally, that is standardized, that basically says, no, wait a second, we already see that you've been issued a Missouri ID. We're not going to give you a California ID unless you allow us to shut down that Missouri ID.
Yeah.
And people might think that's a small thing, but really what it is evidence that a national system is being brought into play that is built around biometrics and digital identification, because that is the company that is putting the emphasis onto the fact that you have a digital picture, not a Polaroid picture, and like that,
Right.
right? And along with the fact that all of us are giving up fingerprint information at our DMV as well, that's going to be centralized, and it's also connected to the health identification, national health identification stuff that already exists. And so what they're attempting to do is just begin to create more centralization of the data, standardization of the process of that collection so that it can ultimately be federally regulated. So when they say, well, this is not building a national ID system, yes, it is. If you need to standardize it, the reason you need to standardize it is because you're building a national system.
It is a national database that has to be interoperable. It's not just
Yes.
you're collecting the same data. It's so you are all the states need to upgrade so that they can share information. But actually, when the 2005 Act was passed, Senator Lamar Alexander even said, we're creating a national ID system.
And I think you should understand when people hear the word interoperability, that's a word you heard with Doge. That is a word of a system that's preparing to collect data, share data, so that we can track what you're really doing and what you're up to, and other things like that. The other thing that you had mentioned, the other thing to say about the importance of 2005 is, Eduardo, do you remember the Sensenbrenner bill of 2006? Do you remember the Day Without Immigrants demonstrations that took place?
Yes, with everyone wearing white.
Right. Sensenbrenner bill had an addition to his bill was very much connected to the Real ID system. And in February 2005, less than 2 months after the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, which helped begin to start the process of Real ID, passed, the Real ID Act of HR 418, introduced by Representative Jim Sensenbrenner. This bill would repeal the provisions regarding identification documents in the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, replace them with a version that would set federal standards directly rather than negotiate with the states. So all those demonstrations that were taking place in the Day Without an Immigrant, that really were coming up around the idea that teachers were being asked to basically snitch on their schools if you had an undocumented person there. That was only the top of one layer of it, one layer of the attack. Really, what was happening was simultaneously with the idea of saying that any citizen could be considered a terrorist unless we've got your fingerprints and biometrics in our Real ID system. And that's really what they're saying is like, unless you can tell us you're not a terrorist and prove to us you're not a terrorist, you are a terrorist. Simultaneously constructing that was a whole set of laws that were coming up with saying, well, who knows who's coming into this country? We're going to restrict, we're going to make restrictions on, we're going to strengthen the border. We're going to make it easier to deport people. We're going to limit amnesty sort of things. And also the stuff of who is really here, which is why they were pushing federal employees or state employees to tell the state, who are you teaching? Who has a driver's license or not? That's why they were trying to get us to snitch. So I want to remind people, all this stuff you're hearing about Real ID is literally intertwined with all immigration legislation, with all this stuff about building border security. And they come, if you want to secure the border, but you want to fight Real ID, you can't, because Real ID is about securing the border. It's based on the idea that everyone is a terrorist. It's just the terrorist could be across the border or the terrorist could be right here because we don't have your facial recognition. And by the way, if you wonder can I get into that Kuwait thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you wonder, well, what could be the implications of that? In just last year in Kuwait, they basically said they were trying to get everyone to get essentially not a Real ID. No, to give up their biometrics.
Yeah.
And there were 60,000 people who didn't do it and didn't do it to the deadline. So what did they do? They froze their bank accounts and said, you cannot get into your bank account. We're closing your Visa cards. We're closing your MasterCards, because they didn't just freeze their bank accounts. They also got rid of all their credit and said, unless you come forward and give us your biometrics, you need
basically have no access.
You have no access to it.
Yeah,
and they did it. Here were some details. Initially, when they said this, you can go to any mall and do your biometrics. But once the deadline hit and your bank account was frozen, then they said, no, now you got to come to a federal building and basically explain to us why you didn't do this. And then we'll see if we unfreeze your bank account. So that's where all this is leading. Yeah. That's where all this is heading. And people talk, it's a social credit system. It is that, but it is a control grid that's being built, and it's being built simultaneously on citizens. Because one last thing is, currently, if it says federal no limits, what does it say? Federal limits apply. That means I can't go into a nuclear power plant. What was the other one I can't do?
It just says federal facilities, which I don't know. It must mean certain ones, because.
And starting May 7th, supposedly, that's what they're saying, I cannot use that ID to get onto a domestic flight. So people do you already see that they're building an internal control system? Do you think this is just about immigrants? But one last thing, and this is what Catherine Austin Fitts said, I think it was her, that is what those limits are subject to change. That the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, if they deem it, they can say, you know what? We're not just going to make it for domestic flights. We're not just going to make it for nuclear facilities. You can't go into any state building. You can't go. That's up to them.
You can't get service from a hospital. You can't get. So basically, it's true. The Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security has, as an individual, unelected, the authority to change where Real ID would be required. So it could, it could be to rent a hotel, to rent a car, to, rent a house.
And just because this is the way the pandemic worked, the Department of Homeland Security, working in conjunction with the Health and Human Resources person, federal Health and Human Resources, may decide that for your safety, you cannot be allowed to go here, here, and here, unless
no medical services for you.
Right, because you didn't get this, this, and this. And this is how these institutions will become interoperable, so that they can make that justification for the control.
Yeah, which we'll get in maybe a little bit deeper on the following on that.
Yeah, but I just think it was really, and I did not know how intimately connected Real ID was to the Sensenbrenner bill. And they weren't just like at the same time; they were literally
within
brothers and sisters to each other. Because Sensenbrenner's things that he was requiring were very much connected to the Real ID Act that was taking place, and that was completely unknown to me.
Kill two birds with one stone. Let's deal with immigrants and our own population.
And I think it also shows, because we've talked about, this is what's left, and we talk about the left kind of seeing only half the picture. Like, it really would have been meaningful for us as the left to know that this was not just something that immigrants are going to be facing, that these bills were in conjunction with controls that are going to be set on citizens.
Right, because most people just think it's just a driver's license. Okay, now we're getting a new kind of driver's license. It's like no big deal. And I myself felt that way, because before I knew this and it was time to renew my driver's license, I was just like, okay, that's, they have all the signs, you got to do this. There's a big push. Can I get into the pushback?
Yeah.
after this in 2005, I think the original deadline for starting to enforce it was 2008. So giving states 3 years to come up to speed. And of course, they were asking the states to, so let's just say over half the states said, hell no. And they passed laws saying we're not going to comply, or resolutions we're not going to comply, because one, it was a breach of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which is that all powers, let's see, let me actually read it. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. So it was a states' rights issue, federal overreach. And at the same time, the feds are saying, oh, you need to upgrade your technology and do all this stuff, and we're not going to give you any money for it. You just got to foot the bill. So states didn't like that. And, there was privacy concerns, of course, because it's collecting all this data and your facial recognition. And, okay, this is going to be chaos at the airport. So there are a lot of reasons that states pushed against it. But what happened was that government bureaucrats and the state agencies colluded with the Department of Motor Vehicles, their head organization, which is called the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, and the Department of Homeland Security. Basically went behind governors' backs and state legislatures who'd said, we're not going to comply, and worked with the DHS to basically make their systems about 95% compliant with what the federal government was asking with Real ID, in exchange for the Department of Homeland Security secretly giving them money.
Yeah.
So they basically ignored, and my guess is that many state legislatures and governors didn't know this was happening behind their back. Some probably did, but anyways, this was done, or maybe, who knows?
My guess is they work hand in glove to you give us money,
assuage
we won't say anything.
Yeah. Right. But I can say that actually there was a lot of push. So of course, because of this pushback, the federal act was delayed from 2008, I think, till like 2010. It's been delayed at least 5 times, right? It came out in 2005. Now it's 2025, and it's not even in effect yet. So there was success in that. But actually, because then the feds wanted to kind of turn up the heat and got, the media and, people like Obama and whatever to just start saying, hey, you're not going to be able to fly. You're not going to be able to fly, to push people to get Real ID. And so apparently in a lot of states that had, said we're not going to be compliant, it was the citizens who started saying, hey, I want to be able to fly. You need to make our state driver's license compliant, right? The reality is, we'll just say that you can use other ways to fly, like a passport card, and then some other kind of less common forms of identification, like if you're a veteran and have a veteran's medical card and stuff like that. So there are ways to still fly internally, so you don't need this.
And what we currently have is a situation where we went from 20. What was the initial compliance by the states? What was the initial percentage? Do you remember?
It was less than half of the states agreed to comply, but now, as of now, all of them are in compliance.
Yeah.
But 44% of driver's licenses and IDs currently in the U.S. are not compliant with Real ID. So there are 44% of the population who has not done this, which is great, but and which is what is making them turn up the heat, kind of like Kuwait. Like, okay, we're now, so the current situation is, as of May 7th of this year, you're supposed to have a Real ID to fly. But it's actually not a real deadline, because it's going to be a progressive 2-year deadline, or so they say. Currently, right now is the plan, that like kind of for 2 years, they just are going to torment you more, and, but still let you fly. Even, here's some information. They're contemplating a 3 strikes, like 3 times of going to the airport with a regular ID. And after that, then you have to use something else, a passport or a Real ID. So the goal is non-compliance. So at 44%, that's a pretty good percentage. It isn't like we just have 10%. So we have a good amount of people not complying. And if we can increase that, like myself, I had a real ID and I got rid of it. So the more people that get rid of it, the harder it's going to be to implement. So we've delayed them by 20 years. Of course, this is not something that's going to simply go away because as we said, the real ID is the Trojan horse for not only the real ID is a national ID, but it's a Trojan horse for digital driver's licenses and a digital ID that will be linked to everything about you.
It will be the digital ID will be very much connected to digital currency. Would be another feature. Yeah, and I would say that and it kind of depends on which state you're in. 4 states, there are
Yes.
4 states like Texas.
5, actually.
5, and all of them are red states.
Yeah.
In which, when you go to your DMV, they will not give you an option. You are going to get
Mandatory real ID.
yeah, a one of those things with a gold star or a star on it, which I
Yes.
think is really interesting that they went to a star in light of what
Those
the-
5 states, just so you know, sorry, no, that's other states. I have too many notes. Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, and Wyoming are the 5 states that don't allow a regular. So the regular non-real ID is called an FNC, a federally non-compliant license.
but if you are not in one of those states, you can go to your DMV and undo. If you see a star on your thing, and again, that star is like a very loaded thing. There, the gold star, right?
We've all learned that.
Well,
That means we're a good person.
no, it
Oh.
means you are a Jew who's
Yeah,
about to be set
that's
to a
true.
camp.
That's true.
And no, I mean, I don't know, man. This is weird shit. So, so that if you see that, it really is worth undoing it. Like,
Oh,
yes,
absolutely.
yes, they've already got this, they already got that. But if you officially take yourself out of the system, it does clearly they have not been able to work as quickly as they wanted to because of all sorts of things. They found back
Keep
doors.
throwing the wrenches in the
Right.
works.
They found back doors within the state resistance. I do believe those states knew about
Yeah,
it.
you're probably
I do believe they were paid off. I do believe the CARES Act was a piece of that as well, because the CARES Act, when CARES 2 came through, it said, oh, we're going to give you some more time to do that, but here's some money as well. And so I do believe this is all sorts of payments being made to say, you give us, the federal government, what we want, we'll make you a little bit more financially, afloat, and all at the expense of people's civil liberties. So I think it's really worth doing that. I also think it's worth, like one of the things I'm going to do when I go travel to Missouri in July or late June, maybe I'll go to Dallas, I guess, is bring my federally non-compliant ID, have my passport in my pocket, but try to just use it, and like, let's go and let's say, okay, that's your first strike. Just keep going. Let's see if their 3 strikes works, and really push their system. And additionally, what I think we'll add is, like, when you go there, they're going to tell you at the thing where you show your ID, hey, can you put your face up to the screen at the airport? Because that's also connected.
They want to get multiple pictures of you to train the ID and to.
Here's something I found with this company, ID Me. I want to read, and it's frightening. It's about the TSA pre-check. And here's something they said as they talked about building, because ID Me is also interested in building a national identity ID
they're working
program
with the government to do that. They're responsible for all the cameras in the ports,
right,
in the airports. They've worked with India, like, to get all of India on this system.
Right. So here's what they wrote. This is from the IDEMIA website. According to several surveys, the use of biometric technology is becoming more and more accepted by users. The 2021 Global Passenger Survey from the International Air Travel Association revealed that 73% of passengers would be interested in using their biometrics instead of boarding passes and passports for all airport processes. The travel industry is not the only one trusting biometric technologies to offer faster and seamless service. So they are doing an experiment on us. That's what this stuff is, and they're trying to slowly work it in, like you turn up the heat on the frog in the pot. And they know that's what this is. So it really is worth not giving that stuff up. We also don't go through the scan, and we've forced, we say we want a pat down. It is worth just slowing their operation down in whatever way possible. But I think the most important thing is if you have a real ID and if you're not in one of those 5 states, get a federally non-compliant ID.
Shall I go into why or how to do that?
Let's see if Eduardo has questions.
Okay.
Well, I think that's important to know because most people don't say, can I request a pat down instead of a scan? What should people say or how should they abort the issue?
So it is interesting. So first of all is the facial recognition. Now there are cameras everywhere around the airport capturing your image all the time. Although I'd say the one that's like 3 inches from your face is going to get a better view. Now there was a story, if you we're going to put links to resources that Twyla Brace in an interview I listened to talked about how one person was stepping up and actually a person I know. So, normally you think they're going to take it when you get right in front of that camera, but I've both in that story and then from someone I personally know that their picture was taken before they got up to that. And when they got up to that and tried to opt out at the TSA agent at the airport, they're like, oh, we already captured it. So they may be capturing your photo when you're a couple people back.
Yeah.
But when you get up to the TSA agent first for the facial recognition, you just say, I'm opting out. And generally they're like, fine. Sometimes, and I think more and more, they're going to be required to ask you why. And they will ask you why, and you don't have to answer. You just have to say, I don't do that. Right. So don't get yourself caught in getting data collected on you on being some sort of, thorn in their side.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is, the what do they call the non-metal detectors?
The EMF scan.
Yeah,
Basically.
EMF scan. So which are harmful, to your body, but they also, are many reasons not to do them. So there you just, when you put your stuff on the when you put your luggage or your on the conveyor belt, that you just tell the agent, I'm opting out of the scanner. And so they'll say, they'll call someone for a pat down.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they'll give you a metal detector option.
Occasionally we've gotten the metal detector, but generally they're like, okay, because then you're suspicious, right? Yeah. Apparently you don't even have to show an ID. That's what Twyla Brace was saying, that there was a guy who went to an airport who said, I'm not going to show you an ID. And it got taken to some court, and the court said, yeah, he doesn't need to show you an ID, but you do then have to undergo, a pat down and questioning and whatever. So just to know that as an aside. But anyway, and you do need to take some extra time because depending on how many people they have on staff, they may make you wait. And my guess is they may make you wait longer and longer because they want it to be hard on you to opt out. They want you to go with the program. So,
but I think
arrive early.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. So arrive early. Be sure you
arrive early.
Time.
Yeah. And I do think if more people do it, it puts a problem into their system. And and in reality, if there was a movement to do this, you could really gum up the.
Gosh, if we got just even 10% of the people going through the airport to do that, it would shut things down.
Yeah. So that would be a way, because basically TSA was the sort of the
point of enforcement.
Yeah, and also the kind of the beginning of creating a screening world. A world where you are screened and facial recognized, all that kind of stuff. Of course, our last week's episode talked about how they want to put TSA into the prisons. I mean, this is where things are headed, and we don't want that. It's like we don't want it in airports, but now they're trying to turn the world into an airport.
Yeah, and in fact, the plan is to more and more have no documents, no IDs, that you just come into the airport and you use, whether it be your face or your palm or your iris, all biometric scans. So they're already allowing people who have TSA pre-check to just use their face to, get into the airport and board a plane.
And those people who do pre-check, oh, we are not going to do any weird stuff about fluids, like what you're bringing.
Right.
They do all sorts of perks.
Perks to get more data from you.
Yeah,
and
you don't have to remove your shoes. We know that you're not a terrorist because you're complying with our system. But again, I think people have to understand the roots of all of this are the Patriot Act. And if you are not a fan of the Patriot Act, then you have to understand that they are implementing element of that Patriot Act through Real ID.
Yeah. My.
Oh, well, I would just say that, of course, the Real ID is a prelude to digital driver's licenses, which apparently I was actually shocked. I knew a couple states had them, but actually at least 14 states plus Puerto Rico already offer digital driver's licenses on smartphones, which of course is loved by law enforcement. And they're saying, oh, it's great, so if you move, instead of having to get a new ID with your correct, it's automatically updated
On your phone.
But of course, it's like everything can be put. I mean, this is what the problem with digital IDs are, but even with a digital driver's license, in fact, I think it does even have, I was reading this article that was about how great it'll be because, think of if you have a digital driver's license, when you go to a club, instead of showing your license where your bouncer can see where you live and whatever, that you won't have to hand over your phone to display your digital driver's license. The license app will exchange info wirelessly with the bouncer's device. The mobile license is easier for the bouncer to check. Instead of scrutinizing your physical license for watermarks or other anti-counterfeiting features, his device will use cryptographic techniques to confirm your license is authentic. And in, I think, that same article, it was like, oh, state agents. So Arizona, I think, was one of the first ones doing digital driver's licenses. Oh, state agencies in Arizona are also starting to accept the mobile driver's license to verify applicants for other state services. And retailers and banks have expressed interest in how they can implement the technology. And then this guy, Jeremy Grant, the coordinator of the Better Identity Coalition, said, some government officials, especially law enforcement, would love to use digital licenses for tracking. Imagine, Grant said, if licenses could report when a woman went to an out-of-state abortion clinic. Right. But already the digital licenses can have everything about every motor vehicle license violation you've had, every traffic ticket, parking, it's just like whatever they want on that license can be there. Your criminal record, so that,
Yeah. The other example that was talked about in the thing you sent me was the fact that police officers can just drive up near cars, and if they're in Bluetooth distance to people, they can pretty much know everyone who's in that car using their digital ID. Unless you were maybe in airplane mode, I guess.
Oh, I think they can still override that.
But that would be the idea, unless you didn't have your phone with you. So if you didn't have your phone, then that could be, I don't know. So it's like, if a cop sees 4 people in a car and they only get 3 signals, that can be the basis for being pulled over.
Right, that's true. The other thing that I wasn't able to verify because I got conflicting reports, that I believe, but I'm not confirmed, that Real IDs have an RFID chip, a radio frequency identifier chip, which emits wireless, radio frequency waves and can transmit information, like can have all your information stored on it and be read remotely. And some people say, oh, it has to be, like we have RFID chips in our credit cards, and you have to put them into a reader. So some people say, oh, well, it can only be read there. Other people say, no, it can be read from a distance. So if Real IDs do actually have that chip in it and the other IDs do not, something like Andy was just saying, can from a distance that, whether it be someone from the government, law enforcement, or some hacker or whatever, can intercept and read your information. Basically, it's more tracking. So I think even before we get into the digital realm, there are more tracking capabilities. So it's not just like gum up the works. I think there are some real downsides to Real IDs at the moment, even if it was never going to go forward, which of course it is. That's the plan. This is the only reason they're doing it.
Yeah. I was going to say something, but go ahead, Eduardo, if you want to.
No, I mean, I think we even have a chip on our passports.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing. It's like California already does fingerprints. And my guess is now that they've changed their cameras to do, pictures for Real IDs, what's to say when you just get your normal driver's license, your facial recognition isn't getting, captured and put into a database. So there are a lot of problems, and we share our information and we're getting surveilled all the time. So it's like, but so you could just throw up your hands and go, it's not worth it. But I'm heartened by the fact that it's been 20 years and they still haven't been successful at doing this. So, and that to hear 44% of people still haven't complied.
That's true. That's a good way to get it.
And I think when people think about this thing of convenience, the example you gave of the going into a bar and the bouncer or the person who's at the door checks, they look at your ID. They could see your face. Yes, they could see your address. Like somebody's talking about that. Like maybe that person, if they has a photographic memory, knows your address. Most likely they're looking at the date. But let's say they would know your address. That's the invasion of privacy that this person is talking about. Instead of thinking, now, if in the new digital ID system, you go to the bar, you put your face up to something, or you put your card up to something, and whatever that card is connected to knows your racial and ethnic origin, medical history, vaccination status, financial status, legal history, travel history, religious beliefs, political opinions, and sexual orientation. Those are the sorts of things that could be possibly hosted on your digital ID. All that information floods right into there, going you don't know where.
Right. Well, they try and claim, you can say what you share and what you don't share, but it's like, yeah, right. Since when have those things been honored?
But all of that is going into a system. So anybody who's saying that a bouncer might remember your address is ignoring the flood of information that's going somewhere else to a third party that you have no idea. And that's happening every moment, right? Particularly when you start to work through a facial recognition, and when you have a situation where every place you go into, you don't need your ID, just go through, recognize your face, boom. Well, what does that mean? That means that your face now has that information, is connected to that information, and it goes into that system to recognize it. So,
and then adds yet another data point. Oh, you visited this store at this time, you bought these things.
So it's a complete collapse of privacy as it relates to institutions, corporate institutions, and state institutions. And yes, we don't interact with a person, but that moment of interacting with a person has very little impact on our privacy. Like, I don't know that person, they don't know me, unless they literally followed me home. There's not it's absurd, the kinds of things people think that we're escaping through this.
Yes, because literally people don't see the bigger picture, and they just see like, oh, there's a bad man doing this, or there's some criminal doing this, and it's going to stop them.
Right. So it's literally the land of inversion, because if that person was genuinely worried about their privacy, they would run like hell from facial recognition. And I'd much rather have a person like, well, do you recognize that person? Like in court, like they say, well, I don't know. They might not. That's a much more private situation than knowing that like your face is having little electronic blocks put around it, and then information is going somewhere by virtue of it.
Absolutely. So I think Andy said already.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading here that the document, these IDs are scheduled to be implemented in phases from the 7th of May to the 5th of May, from 2025 to 2027.
Yeah, so that's 2 years of progressive enforcement that I said that's their hope, that starting May 7th of this year, the TSA agents are going to be more, already in the last year or two. Well, first of all of the airports, if you haven't noticed, there's signs about get your real ID that have been there for a couple of years. But every time Andy and I have flown with our federally non-compliant licenses, we're handed, a handout about here's how to get your real ID. So I think there'll be more of that, and more of, scare tactics, and not letting people know, like, you can get a passport card for actually cheaper than you could get your real ID renewed. So.
And that's the same way it worked in Kuwait, though. I will say that, like, people who
it's all fine, it's all optional, or it's just no big deal.
You can go to a mall and get your biometrics collected. We're going to make it easy on you. But there was a period of time, and then the door shut
down. Yeah.
And I think that's the similar thing. This is the beginning of when they're saying we're going to be patient with this, we've already been patient enough. We wanted this in 2005.
Yes.
We've had to wait till 2024 to and there have been already several deadlines.
Yeah,
that
they've kept pushing their new deadline, new deadline, new deadline.
But this is the one it seems like they're making more of an emphasis to push. This is where they hope to go from 44% non-compliance on Real ID to possibly 30% or 25% or 20%. And just like we talked about with the Wildcat strike, if you can get the number of non-compliant down to a particular percentage, then you can snap the thing on them and know that the 80% will be fine, 20% will be fucked, and let's go work on those folks. And that's what they're trying to get to.
And I wonder what percentage of that 44 is undocumented immigrants. Because right now, I don't know how many states, I didn't look, other than California, allow undocumented folks to have IDs and licenses. But with the Real ID, once it's enforced, you need to prove that you're here in the country legally with all these documents. So, that's good. So if you're concerned, if you're an immigrant, you love an immigrant, or you're concerned about immigrants, they're then going to be like our friend Eduardo, driving without a license, but pulled over, and then they're going to be in jail, or whatever. So they're going to be criminalized, and just life will get harder in many ways, because they won't have an ID especially if the Real IDs, your driver's license is needed for many things, but it will be needed for more and more things.
Yeah. And I would just say, if you're MAGA and you're concerned about your civil liberties, you should be concerned about immigrants' rights, because these things are now they're completely
They're one and
connected.
the same. So getting to Andy already said, how do I know if I have a Real ID? So first of all, I will just show that I made this flyer. We'll post it. It's California specific, but most of it, some of it's California specific about how you actually go through and do things, but the information is applicable to other states. So at least in California, but I think most of the Real IDs throughout all the states have a star. So you can see here, if you have a star, so in California licenses, it's a bear with a star, you have a Real ID. So you don't want that. You want the one that says federal limits apply and doesn't have a star. And so how you do that is you schedule an in-person appointment at the DMV, and you go in early if you can, because you're going to need to use one of their computers to fill out an application. So on the computer, you select correct or update my license. And then it doesn't, because basically going from a Real ID to a federally non-compliant, no one does it. So be unique and do it. So there's not an obvious way to do it. So you have to check other and just write in that you want to change from a Real ID to a federally non-compliant license. And you, at the end, there's a confirmation number, and write that down just in case. And then you go in line, wait for your turn, get to the clerk and tell them, hey, I'm wanting to change my license from Real ID to federally non-compliant. And you are going to get like blank stares and like, why do you want to do that? Like, this is going to be unheard of. They are just not going to understand. And seriously, to the point where I went through all this with this clerk the first time I went in, and we got to the end, and I was like, and just verifying, right, that it's federally non-compliant. She's like, oh my gosh, wow, I was just issuing you another Real ID. Like, they're just, because people are coming in either to renew their Real IDs or to upgrade to a Real ID. So you have to just be very, they're on autopilot. They do that all the time. So you just make sure, keep reminding them that you want an FNC license. Now, I can say, when I went, my Real ID license was expiring. And so I went down and I wanted to change it. But also, I assumed that in changing it, I would get a new expiration date. So in the mail, when I got my new federally non-compliant license, it had the same expiration date, which now was like immediate. So I had to go back and then change the expiration date. And then what I got in the mail was an FNC. I mean, sorry, a real ID. So they switched me back to a real ID, and I was like, holy shit. I mean, I know. So the sad thing is, once you're in the system, you're kind of in the system. They already have all your documents in your, digital facial scan. And I was like, I wonder if they, just always want to bump you to that. But when I went back, the clerk was like, no, when you renew, they should give you the same grade license. So she thought that was an error. And in fact, in her computer, it said that I had a federally non-compliant license. In fact, so much so that she was like, I don't know how to issue you a federally non-compliant from this new renewed, because it says you already are. So she had to issue me a whole new FNC license because there was no way to do it. So the system, you might have to do more work than you want, just because the system is so pushing you into Real ID. And I would say, if you have to renew the expiration and you want to change at the same time, you need to ask the clerk how to do that, so you don't, get one that either is expired or is now back to a Real ID. I can say that I chatted up both times I went down. So if you have to, and in fact, when I renew my, when this new one that expires in 4 years, I probably, if they still allow you to go to the DMV, because right now they've eliminated all the many, many things you can do at the DMV, so you no longer can. But I will probably go in person, because how I renewed was via mail, via their application. So you have, and they assume that you're not doing FNC, so there's nothing on it about that. So anyways, I think better safe than sorry, go in person, because you might get pushed back to a Real ID if you had one before. But I was going to say that I've chatted up both the clerks, and first of all, one of them was already kind of like, yeah, I don't like the data collection, and I'm already off Facebook, and I want to grow my own food. And once she kind of understood what I was doing, we had a whole conversation. And the other person was she was basically, bring this information, print out a flyer when you go to the DMV. In fact, I would like to do some actions where I just go to the DMV and start handing these out to people in line, people who are standing in line for their Real ID, so that they are educated. But certainly, anyways, so the other clerk was very interested and had no idea about, some of the problems with this. And so I said, would you like some information? She was like, yes, I told. So it was very interesting.
Brandee, our Brandee is so committed. Look at her little flyer. Let me see it, Brandee.
I know, it's very good. I must say, I've been less, because I had a digital currency thing about the dangers, use cash, don't go to digital currency. And that was very easy when I went shopping to talk to cashiers, because I was paying cash. And I must say, I have not used this as much as I would like. I mean, oftentimes cashiers are just rushed, or they're not English speakers, or what have you. But jumping from our transaction over produce or something to Real IDs is more of a leap. But now, with the May 7th deadline coming, I think it's might be more in people's mind. In fact, I brought it up to a couple people in the last few weeks, and people who are part of the freedom community and are really aware of things. And one was like, oh my gosh, I was just about to go get it because mine is expiring. I needed to get a Real ID because I want to be able to fly. And I, did not know that you can fly without a Real ID. You just need a passport or a passport card, or one of the other kinds of identifications that you probably don't have unless you're a veteran or.
And I would say that this would be good for me to bring. I should have a few of these to go to when I go on Southwest.
Yeah.
So if they do stop me and say, "Hey, where's your Real ID?" I'm going to say, "Well, this is why I don't have it, and you should keep this and look into it because you're doing the devil's work." And then pull out my passport.
Okay.
But
I love it.
I know that what Brandee had to go through was
That's a whole ordeal.
You had to go from Real ID to federally non-compliant. That was definitely an ordeal. I do think that they're trying to make it, by making the DMV less in person.
Yes.
They are trying to make it so you kind of can't do these things. So it is worth doing this, because if more of us do this, and if more of us urge others to do it, we may find that our DMV is less surprised. You may find that people are like, I'm starting to see some people do that. Now, that is the goal of when you're trying to build a movement like this, which is kind of like closer to a boycott almost. That's what you want people to experience. You want people who are selling grapes to see that they're not selling as many grapes. To give you an analogy kind of thing. So that's what we're urging people to kind of start to think of doing here, because I do think that 44% number is obviously slowing things and stopping them from going to the next step. Because Real ID is not the goal. Real ID is a step towards the goal of a digital ID, which is a step towards the goal to digital currency, which again
Is a total control grid.
locks in control. Because let's go back to Kuwait. Once they can get everything digital, they don't just manipulate the value of your money, which they can do because money becomes programmable. They can literally shut off and on your access to what you thought was your money, because it's no longer yours. It's now,
You don't comply with this, you don't get medical care. You don't comply with that, you can't rent a house. You don't comply with that, you don't get a job.
and it's anything. It's the flavor of the month in terms of compliance,
Right.
right? Because in Kuwait, it was just like, what we need you to do is give up your biometrics. Why wouldn't you give up your biometrics? Are you a terrorist? Are you a criminal? Oh, well, we don't know that, so here we're shutting this down. So as we said, what happened to the truckers under the COVID is the wave of the future. That may have been seen like big non-compliance, but that is just an example of the kinds of things that they're going to begin to do.
Or as we saw with, at the time, some of it was on your phone, some of it, but the COVID vaccination cards, that you couldn't get into a theater, you couldn't get into a restaurant, you couldn't get into, so there are many ways that, it's not about convenience, it's about control.
Yeah.
And so the number one thing to do is to get rid of your Real ID if you already have it. And if you don't have it, don't ever get it.
Mm-hmm.
And to let other people know and let them know why. And then if you, believe that we can actually do something in the governmental realm, you want to, in fact, I think today is the end of it, but within the first so the new kind of 2-year progressive enforcement of the Real ID Act was written as a rule in January of this year in Congress. And there is the Congressional Review Act that allows within 60 legislative days for congressmen to write a simple bill to just basically nullify that. And so there was a push by the organization that we will link to that is doing a push against Real ID and rejecting it. So they had a petition, and we're asking you to sign the petition and call your congressmember to get them to stop this enforcement of the Real ID Act. That may, by the time this episode comes out, be over, but you still, if you believe in influencing your government, both your state legislatures and your congressional reps, to let them know this is an issue that is important to you, right? Because they're not probably hearing it from many people, but the more people they hear it from, potentially there could be an effect, and there could be a repeal of the act if you want to think that we can affect government.
Yeah. And last thing, or not last, but I want to go back to that list of states that are currently don't give you an option on Real ID. And Georgia, Mississippi, Wyoming, Florida, and Texas. So the freedom states. And let's be clear, how are they probably justifying it? They're probably justifying it on the idea that we have to stop immigrants from coming in.
Yeah.
But you suckers, they're building the prison for you too. So this is being led by the conservatives, and this is being in the same way that Africa is the experiment ground for the vaccination program. Texas and Florida is the experiment ground for the digital ID and digital currency. So, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, people, like MAGA people, like they keep just not getting it.
It's a trick to get them on board. Right.
Well, not just on board, to literally, it's like Israel was the place where Pfizer was experimenting with the entire population. You're like a Pfizer bitch in Texas for the Silicon Valley, you know? So I don't know what to tell you. It's like,
MAGA friends, come.
Yes.
Where were you?
right. I mean, you're supposed to be fighting
Where
this.
are you? Where are you in
But
this?
you are leading the charge and implementing it, and you should stop that. Like
Yeah.
fight it in Texas. If you could get Texas and Florida
Right, to reverse
to
their-
reverse the
yeah.
idea that everyone had it, that'd be a giant win. And I'd be like, go MAGA people, go. But you got to start doing that.
Or just be like Eduardo, just don't renew your licenses.
Right.
Which
Right. Okay.
there's something to be said for that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Just not even.
Mhm.
We should all be undocumented.
Yeah.
I haven't renewed my I keep driving that way. What am I gonna do? But we'll see. I drive very carefully. I ride my bike, and then I just avoid many places where I think that, I might get stopped, or just try
Yeah.
to.
Yep.
Boy, I try to drive very carefully.
Well, when I had my car unregistered for a long time, because I had Missouri plates and I was not in Missouri any longer, but they were unregistered. I just remember any time that I saw a cop in the rearview mirror, I would just pull over and stop
Uh-huh.
and just like kind of go somewhere else and just as if I was an actual criminal, and then wait for them to go by and then go back on the road.
Yeah. I'd get really nervous when I'd see cops behind me,
Yeah.
and then I just, find a way to just pull over as well.
Yep. So
Slow way.
all that stuff.
Yeah, and all that it's like, well, right now they don't know who you are. They don't, but soon they, like you said, from a distance, they'll know exactly who you are, when the last time you got a shot was, when, what your transactions have been recently, where you've traveled. It's just everything about you will be known and easy to control your behavior. And it's not just, a lot of people think, oh, I don't do anything wrong or whatever, but what you don't realize is your behavior is still being controlled. Your opinions, my opinions are still being swayed. It's like they've done so many social, psychology studies where it's like people are completely unaware that their opinions are being shifted or that their behaviors are being shifted. They have no idea, but it's just through the little nudges. And there are ones that you do know, like, oh, I get a discount if I give Safeway, all my information and have a Safeway card, so whether it's, it or you don't know it, your behavior and your thinking is being changed.
Yeah.
So even if you're, because Andy and I are not, criminals, we're not doing like horrible stuff that we need to hide, but we don't want, the government to be able to shut off our lives, because we went to a protest or because we said something online that they didn't agree with, or because we didn't get the latest shot.
Right. And I think people who put it in terms of I'm not doing anything wrong are framing it the wrong way. It's like what they're really saying is I never intend on resisting anything a corporation or government is doing.
Yes, I will always be compliant and good.
I haven't resisted anything the government or corporations are doing. I will never do that. It's almost like you're getting married to a corporation and saying, I will forever be, obedient to you, kind of thing. And that's
we can already see it if you've been following what's happening in the UK and Germany as far as their censorship online and their rules around. It started with kind of like no hate speech, no whatever. But like certainly in Germany, it's like you can't criticize a government official. Like some pretty simple, like people have been fined or even put in jail for like being like, this supervisor is being a moron, just stuff like that. A moron because I don't like his policies. And it's like, okay, now you have someone at your door. Literally this is happening now for minor stuff. It's not like I'm threatening to kill an immigrant or something like that.
And you've already mentioned instances where there are people in the United States, individuals at least, who've had their bank accounts shut down.
Absolutely.
Like Mercola.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. So if you're not, and some people think, well, I don't have fringe ideas. Well, that's the whim of the current, state of affairs. It's like, right now you can't support Palestine. Okay. I know a lot of, progressive people who support Palestine. So imagine your bank account shut because you went to a, anti-genocide against the Palestinian people.
And there's an individual, I can't remember his name, who's going to be
Yes.
deported. because he's a Palestinian, married to a U.S. citizen, and because of his views, not because of anything he did, he's being threatened with deportation. Mahmoud Khalil, I think, is his name, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and this is not just happening to Mahmoud Khalil. If they do it to him, they can do it to anyone.
Yeah.
And they maybe deport you, but maybe they geometrically geofence you. So, folks, it is like from last episode, an injury to one is an injury to all. You have to remember that. And Eduardo mentioned the episode where we talked about what's his favorite dude from InfoWars?
Alex Jones?
Alex Jones, yeah.
His favorite dude.
No, but he was like, at that time, he was like, I don't think Alex Jones should be given. And then through time, he saw, Alex Jones is nobody. In fact, I think he's a government. I think he's kind of put up there to do that. But whatever, he saw that, once they got him, they can get us. And they did. They got us. But he and I have been censored in the same way that Alex Jones has been censored.
So many people have been censored.
Yeah.
And deplatformed. People like you guys don't do it for money, but there are other people that they're, journalists or whatever, and, their ability to feed their families has been cut off.
So is that rule, that union rule, is one that we all need to really internalize, because if it can happen to another worker, it can happen to any of us.
So reject Real ID, definitely reject digital ID, but Real ID, basically just see it as a digital ID.
Yeah, see it as building a hurdle to the digital ID. And if we can construct that hurdle for them, then we've got
all downhill.
Well, we've got a shot.
The gates close. Yeah. As Catherine Austin Fitts says, all the gates are, being built, and it's just that last one that needs to be put in place. And digital ID is that.
Yeah. Big one.
The linchpin.
Well, thank you both.
Oh, thank you, Eduardo.
Nice job, sweetie.
So good to be here.
I think this is a good place to conclude.
Yes.
Yeah. I appreciate it for informing us. Get undocumented or go back to help me here.
FNC, Federally Non-Compliant License.
The licenses. And you don't have to go through the scan. You could get patted down instead.
Oh, yeah.
And you can, at this point, opt out of their formal facial recognition at the airport.
Yeah.
Try to get this so that people can get copies of it.
Yeah.
I have a way of doing it. So
okay.
We won't be able to put it on the YouTube episode because we can't put any description things. Although I think what I'm going to do is layer some of the description stuff into the actual video so that if people wanted to, they could, but it's not the best. I'm not going to put a QR code up there. But in other episodes, if on other platforms, if you are listening to this through YouTube, check us out on Rumble or Odyssey, and you'll be able to get all the descriptions, all the links there. And one of the links will get you to this thing, and then you can make your own copy. Because I have a way of doing that.
Great.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. Let's conclude. What's left is I was smiling when I was reading the intro because I looked up quickly and Brandee's looking at me. And then I'm like, I have to focus on the intro. I'm looking at the outro and I don't want to look at Brandee because she'll make me smile. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog on whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, such as our friends who have done that, contact us through our blog. You'll have Andy answer you again. Thank you, Andy. Credit to Andy for doing all this work. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson, and thank you for joining us, Brandee.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Our beloved Brandee. Thank you, and hope to have you again on future episodes. Thank you all for listening, and take care. Ciao.
Bye.